Oh man, those top players are so cool. I wish I was like them. I've only beaten Bloodbath. I'm so bad, man.
Hey player,
Who are you?
does that matter?
No, I guess not. Did you want to tell me something?
Yes, actually. Being all self-conscious doesn't achieve anything good. I mean, you've beaten Bloodbath, that's already a good accomplishment, no?
But basically everyone's done that by now.
No way, that's much harder than you give it credit for.
How do you know?
Because... How do I know that actually? How good even is the average player? I would divide Geometry Dash skill into a few main quote-unquote tendencies. Neither of these necessarily has much overlap with the others, but I think basically everybody would agree that they all represent to some degree how good a player is. But first, how do people even play Geometry Dash? Well, the primary division we can make is between classic and platformer plays. Since I have basically no experience with platformer or its community, I'll focus on classic skill for this video. If you want to conduct my investigation for platformer, you're welcome to adapt it and do that. Right. Next, we can divide all players into two broad categories: casual and dedicated gamers. A casual gamer will likely hop on for 10 minutes to play a popular level that recently came out, but has no broader goal in Geometry Dash. While skill as a concept still applies to these players, I won't be focusing on them specifically. On the contrary, a dedicated gamer will intentionally pour time into achieving specific goals in Geometry Dash. That's still broad, so let's develop it further. The first and most evident tendency in Geometry Dash are Slayers. These are players who focus on beating harder and harder levels as they improve at the game. If you're a Slayer, you could expect to spend much of your time in GD on completing new hardests, or other difficult maps at the Extreme Demon level. The second, and probably next biggest tendency, are Creators. These players spend most of their time in Geometry Dash in the map editor, and their skill is much less objectively quantifiable than Slayers, since level building is a much less technical and more creative part of the game than level playing. The third and final major tendency I'll consider are Star Grinders. A Star Grinder will mostly play a wide variety of rated Geometry Dash levels for the goal of gaining as many stars as possible on their account. The main reasons people Star Grind are to experience many user levels and perhaps claim a spot on the in-game leaderboards, whose default evaluation criterion is star count. Of course, besides these three tendencies, we also have players who focus on grinding things like demons or achievements, those who play challenges, or those who mainly do content creation. However, these are either much nicher communities or much harder to quantify than the aforementioned three, so less time will be given to them. But now that we've established the main directions of skill in Geometry Dash, how do we actually measure a player's competence in them? Let's start with the easiest tendencies to quantify. Any skill tied to an in-game statistic, for example stars, demons, or coins, is basically RobTop's gift to our little experiment. To evaluate a player, we just look at their account and see how many stars, demons, etc. they have completed. The more, the better. If you're familiar with Geometry Dash, you may question why I didn't include creator points in that list, but that's because they aren't actually a strictly reliable indicator of creating skill. The problem with them is that they're too indirect of a statistic to use here. To prove my point, let's open the map packs. This is Back on Track RM by Xanthic Alpha, released over a decade ago. By modern standards, this would at best be moderately delightful to find in the recent tab. If you try to suggest that this level indicates a high degree of proficiency in creating levels, your point would be hard to take seriously. That may have been true when the level was created, but certainly not anymore. Despite that, this level is rated by RobTop with a feature, meaning it contributes 2 creator points to Xanthic Alpha's profile. To complicate the matter further, Xanthic Alpha is indeed a legendary and highly skilled creator, but clearly Back on Track RM is not a good showing of that fact. Hell, quite a large portion of Xanthic Alpha's creator points were earned far before the creator was even expanded far enough to allow for creating skill to be as developed as it is today. Besides that, the creator RPLY has less than a tenth of Xanthic Alpha's creator points, but yet created Comatose, widely regarded to be one of the best levels to come out of version 2.2 so far. And that's only one side of the matter. See, Jumpshadash's rating system relies on several layers of randomness, unknown filtering, and subjectivity. If you don't know, RobTop personally assigns certain players the role of moderator. These players have the ability to send levels they like into the Sent tab in Geometry Dash, entirely dependent on the moderator's subjective opinion. Then, every day, RobTop checks the Sent tab with an undisclosed set of filters and grants a rating to about 10 or so levels, also entirely dependent on subjective opinion, this time RobTop's. This means that even high quality or genius levels may remain unrated due to sheer lack of notoriety. That's why we can't use creator points to evaluate creating skill. That said, we can use them as a heuristic when building a composite index. In a possible creator skill index, we could include things like the number of levels longer than 30 seconds on an account, indicating number of attempts at creating a serious level or layout, average number of likes on each of these levels, average editor time spent on each of these levels, which you can see through a mod such as Better Info or estimate indirectly, and of course, creator points. None of these are perfect measures, of course, but considering them together will help to smooth out any irregularities. I'll explain more about how I actually calculate them in the next chapter. But anyway, the last main tendency left for us to consider are the slayers, gamers who choose to focus on improving their gameplay skill above all else. The general favorite measure of gameplay skill throughout the Geometry Dash population is the hardest. That is, the hardest completion a player has achieved. It should be clear that, for example, a slayer whose hardest completion is Avernus or Slaughterhouse is probably better than one whose hardest completion is Sonic Wave, who is probably better than someone whose hardest is Accu or Cataclysm. And most likely all three of these hypothetical players are better than someone who hasn't even beaten an Insane or Extreme Demon. There we go, a relatively objective index of Slayer skill, where your hardest is placed on the all-rated Extreme Demons list. Well, not so fast. Keep in mind that there are still players who can be considered slayers despite the fact that they haven't beaten an extreme demon. Perhaps they just haven't progressed to that skill level yet, but they clearly share the same goal as other slayers. In turn, this makes them part of the same tendency. Hence, we should compose a pseudo-demon list which incorporates all Geometry Dash difficulties. Currently, the Arido has extreme demons going down to placement 1528. Since Geometry Dash difficulty is exponential, that is, the difference between 1000 and 600 is much smaller than the difference between 600 and 200, we can assign an arbitrary placement below 1528 to all insane demons. Let's say insane demons can be placed at 1600, hard demons at 1800, medium demons at 2100, and so forth, all the way down to easy difficulty levels at 6000. Again, these placements are arbitrary, but it's better than having literally no way to evaluate them. Beyond this, there's also a more subtle point. Clearly, an extreme demon player whose hardest is Yatakarasu will gain a lot of skill from completing a level such as Bloodlust, but beating Square Adventure will do basically nothing for them, apart from giving them a frustrating experience. To account for this, we should only consider something like the hardest 50 or 100 completions that a player has accomplished, using only levels that actively contributed to the player's skill level. I would want to also factor for playtime or attempt count on each of these levels, but that's either impossible to gather at scale or too variable to be useful. Of course, this isn't a perfect measure. None of these are. There can't be any for something as amorphous and indeterminate as skill, but I did try to come up with some useful skill heuristics for each tendency of Geometry Dash players. And now, let's actually get measuring. Let's cut to the chase. What we want is a mathematical formula for determining an arbitrary player's skill level in each of 3 main categories and 2 bonus categories. The main categories are number of stars, skill in creating, and skill in slaying. The bonus categories are number of demons completed and number of coins. Both bonus categories and the first main category can be left as they are, since they're already perfectly indicative of the skill they represent. What remains to be formulated are creator skill and slayer skill. As stated prior, creator skill will be built as a composite index of 4 parts, each clamped to a value between 0 and 1, and then weighed by a given coefficient. Here they are. Number of levels longer than 30 seconds. This should be divided by 50, since it's very hard to create more than that number. If it is exceeded, we should just clamp the value to 1. We then weigh this with an influence factor of 0.2. Average number of likes on each level. We can sum the amount of likes on each of the creators' levels and divide them by a very high number, like 5 million. Only massive creators with a large amount of banger levels will realistically reach this. Once again, we can clamp the value between 0 and 1, then weigh it with an influence factor of 0.2. Average creator time spent on each level. This is computed in the same way as number of likes, but we use a maximum hour count of 10,000 hours and an influence factor of 0.3. creator points. Same thing, but a maximum creator point count of 508, which Split 72 has at the top of the in-game leaderboard, and an influence coefficient of 0.3. The final creator skill heuristic formula we get is this. We can create a similar mathematical formula for Slayer skill. To do so, we have to take a player's hardest 100 completions. If they say something about a completion in their profile comments, great, we can just use those. By searching a readle for these level names, we can compile a list of up to 100 placements. In the event of a deficit of comments, we can check the number of completions of each difficulty and extrapolate from there. Since all difficulties are already assigned an arbitrary placement, all we have to do is choose a placement for unknown extreme demons. Let's say something popular that most extreme demon players are likely to complete, Bloodbath at 808. Rounded a little, and we assume non-given extreme demons to be around placement 800. After we've got our list of the player's 100 hardest completion placements, all we have to do is reciprocate them and sum them all together. This makes easier completions proportionally less influential in the skill ranking. In the end, we get this Slayer skill formula. So now, we can finally determine player skill once and for all. Well, that's what I would have said, but before that, let's discuss statistical bias for a second. See, this entire video hinges on the premise of analyzing a bunch of players and attempting to quantify how good they are at the game, such that we may come to a conclusion about the average player. The problem with this is that we don't yet have the one thing we actually need. Players. See, we can't just take a list of given players, since they're not random enough to be a reliable sample. To state the obvious, we can't use the in-game leaderboards to judge the average player's star grinding skill, since the star count would be so significantly skewed upwards that it wouldn't represent anything meaningful. And even then, if we choose players entirely randomly, we'll probably land on mostly casual gamers, which play the game fundamentally differently to dedicated ones. So, what percentage of Geometry Dash players are dedicated? Maybe 10 to 25%? Just as a guess? Well, if we look at Steam achievement data, we see that 25.0% of players have gotten the achievement Geometrician, meaning they've completed over 100 user-created levels. Since this is very easy to estimate if you know someone's account, our sample will consist entirely of random players filtered by the requirement of over 100 user-level completions. I think this is probably a decent lower bound for detecting determined players. As for finding players to filter, well, okay, I did this in a really straightforward way. I literally just wrote a piece of code that would randomly generate user IDs and then automatically check the accounts they correspond to. Then I ran them through the filter, extracted whatever data I could, and finally, over 100 random players. Each one evaluated, each one given a skill ranking in several key skills. I hope you enjoy. This is the average dedicated player's profile. They have a bit over 2,000 stars, about half of all the gold coins you can possibly get in the game, almost 300 user coins, 67 demon completions of any difficulty, and no creator points. If we check the demon completion stats, we see that a majority of the players' demons are of easy demon difficulty. What's interesting is that the second most common demon difficulty is extreme demon. This could be due to several factors. For many players, extreme demons are basically all they play, and this means they're more likely to complete them relative to other demon difficulties. Many players will also hack levels of this difficulty. And since I had no way of conclusively filtering hackers out of my dataset, I didn't do it. But believe me, I found no shortage of suspicious accounts. I would realistically expect this number to actually be somewhat lower than shown here. Another factor are players with a significant amount of extreme demons. Since this average is mean-based, the overall count can be skewed upwards by outliers. Still, I think it's an interesting finding. In terms of our compound score indices, the average player has a Slayer score of about 0.037 and a creator score of about 0.015. Now, without any reference point, these numbers feel pretty meaningless, so let's quickly compare them to some other players. The top player Zoink has a Slayer score of over 3.57. The top star grinder Mr. Spaghetti has a Slayer score of 0.132. The top creator Split 72 has a creator score of 0.65. The pathetic idiot Pyramid has a Slayer score of 0.063 and a creator score of 0.082. It should be noted that these are all estimates based on information provided by the players themselves. So, for example, if you beat an extreme demon placed at number 320, but didn't post about it on your Geometry Dash profile, it will be estimated by placement 800, thereby technically losing you Slayer score. Unfortunately, short of literally asking the players what their hardest completions are, we can't really do much better than this. Similarly, I had to estimate creator time for the creator score metric, which I did based on the number of objects in a level. Don't get me wrong, this is unfathomably flawed, but I couldn't really think of a better way to do it at scale. If I were to always use mods in-game to see editor time, the data gathering process would have taken far too long to be even remotely feasible. I would have had to manually evaluate and check literally thousands of levels to make that work. Either way, I hope you guys appreciate my efforts in data gathering. You should also note that these are specifically dedicated players, gamers of Jump Dash who have completed over 100 online levels. If you haven't reached this skill level, don't bother judging yourself over it, I'm sure you'll get there someday. I know you guys probably want to see the Slayer and creator scores of a few famous Geometry Dash players or content creators, so let's go ahead and check them out. And if you think someone's scores are underrated, remember, it's just because of methodological limitations that were basically impossible or were unfair for me to avoid. Please don't crucify me, please. Riot, Vortrox, W Popov, King Samalon, GD Colon, Connex, Doggy Dasher, Carmal, Nepesta, and finally, Mindcap. So that was my little statistics project. What do you think?
I'm like 12, I don't understand what you're talking about.
I really hope you guys liked watching this video, or at least found something informative in it. It genuinely took hours to gather a lot of the data and figure out how to process it in a way that would extract anything valuable, so any support is appreciated. If you want to see the code I wrote to do this, check out this Codeberg repository. And as always, please subscribe and hit the thumbs up button if you liked my video. Perhaps you could even join my Discord server for any future notifications or events. But for now, that'll be all.